All right, folks, we're going to get started. Those of you who stayed in the space from the previous presentation, thanks so much for sticking around. But I see a bunch of new people have joined us on the Zoom, so I'll just quickly say bienvenue tout le monde. Hi, everybody. On behalf of Fourth Space and the In.Site Residency Planning Committee, welcome everyone in person or via Zoom to Critical Materialities Towards Resilient Environments and Technologies, with Alice Jarry, who's here in the space with us. We are streaming live from Concordia University's Fourth Space, which is located on unceded indigenous lands in Jojage. And at Fourth Space, if it's your first time here with us or online, what do? We collaborate with our university community to essentially connect folks to the diverse initiatives, research projects, and conversations, dialogues and development across the university. So we're super pleased to have had the opportunity to collaborate with the In.Site team to explore sustainable practices and pedagogies in fine arts this entire week. It's been super fun so far, and we're very much looking forward to Alice's presentation today. I'll just say, those of you behind me here in the space today, feel free to adjust your chairs. Hey, they're not bolted down, so Alice is going to be showing some video content and some images. So if you'd like to turn your chairs around the big screen, you know, feel free to do as you wish to make yourselves comfortable. Okay, that's all out of me. Over to you, Alice. Welcome.
Now, is it better? Okay, great. So, hi everyone. Thanks for your presence, and thanks to the In.Site team for the invitation, and to Fourth Space and then Doug and everyone for the organization. It's always a pleasure to be here. So my name is Alice Jarry. I'm an artist researcher and assistant professor in the Design and Computation Arts department. I'm also Associate Director of the Milieu Institute for the Arts, Culture and Technology, and Director of the Milieu Speculative Life Biolab. In this presentation, I will look at different projects of the new Concordia University Research Chair in Critical Practices in Materials in Materiality. In a context of ecological emergency, how do artists and scientists work together to materialize sensory and sensitive experience of environmental issues? And how can artistic and design objects be mobilized to co-create new forms of critical imaginaries? So in this presentation, I'll focus on the way in which this art, science, and community framework encourages new social use of research creation. So before moving forward, I'd like to briefly situate these questions in past projects. I specialize in site-specific responsive works, art science practices, and social environmental design. My research engages with cultural and material production, and I focus on the transformative potential of residual matter, smart and biomaterials for the built environment and the arts. In this research, I look at how materials can provoke the emergence of new social and aesthetic relations, be it through objects, environments, or events. The video that you see here comes from a piece of a series of 3 artworks called Dust Agitator Series, which examines one fine and exhausted particle produced by the processing of glass and the recycling of glass in Quebec, beyond its transformation in post-consumer product use in infrastructures. And I'll speak about it in a few minutes. So the concept of residue, defined as something that's been excluded or lost from the process history of a material, energetic, social, or technological system, is transversal to my whole research and the Kirk's research project as well. So the fine particle that you see here are substances that persist after the transformation or the extraction of a higher value product. And a residue is both the result of human activity and everything we wish to exclude from it. Nature does not produce residue. So this process of refinement, loss, exclusion, troubles our notion of matter and also questions the nature of the operations, the processes, and the practices that we enable as designers and artists. So in connection with this idea of residue and unwanted materials, I'd like to take the opportunity to reflect on the larger notion of recycling and repurposing. So recycling is the process of taking waste, generally consumer materials, plastic, paper, metal, or glass, breaking it down and turning it into a reusable product. On the other hand, upcycling or creative reuse repurposes waste material, useless or unwanted products into new items of better quality or value. For example, I don't know if you see on the small screen, but again, feel free to turn your chair so you see better. For example, the Smog-Free project by Studio Rose Garde highlights the importance of clean air and transforms CO2 particles in jewelry. Another project, Waste-Based Bricks by Stone Cycling, creates bricks out of construction waste. The question that I want to ask, and it's possibly very speculative, is what does value mean when we speak of upcycling and creating better value? Can we engage with materials for both their effective and affective quality, for both their positive environmental role and their potential to make us dream alternative futures? So these questions span across 3 past projects: Lighthouse, Dust Silica, and Dust Agitator. Although speculative in nature, they're each in their own way an exploration of this question of cycle at the artistic, methodological, and political level. As the whole process mobilizes a continuum of material, geological, human, and technological relationships, I want to consider how this very broad idea of creative reuse can circulate in different contexts. So how can we invent new scenarios for at-risk materials and propose a reflection on the material production and its social environmental impact? So the first piece, which was done a few years ago, but it's just to contextualize broad research questions within the Kirk, is called Lighthouse and was realized in Belgium with artist Vincent Evrard. So the piece was developed both in Europe and Canada, and the installation is composed of recycled glass, motors, dichroic glass, which is a certain kind of glass that blocks or allows certain wavelengths to pass, and LEDs. So conversely to an inert material, Lighthouse looks at glass ability to generate light and sound signals, unstable and fleeting. It explores how the material can respond, interfere, and transform over time. So Lighthouse was always developed with and for the characteristics of each space, and glass was always a material sourced locally in different recycling facilities. So while working on this piece, the nature of the material itself and a kind of sensibility to the social environmental impact of industrial production prompt me to expand my research and expand the site of my research to glass recycling facilities in Belgium and see how glass operates and is complicated in different industrial contexts. In her book Materiality, art historian Petra Langbert proposes a methodology or a method that she calls material complicity. She argues that to engage with materiality consists in following different processes, filiations, networks outside of their use in an artistic practice. And this demands for practitioners to consider the environmental, technological, economic continuum that surrounds each materials and their qualities. So it is using this kind of approach of material complicity that the Dust Silica project emerged. So the Dust Silica project looks at sand as the raw material that composes glass, the concrete of our cities as well, and a lot of components linked to our online digital lives. It's also a materiality which is at the heart of very problematic social environmental issues all over the world. And Dust Silica questions with regards to sand, the conflicted relationships that links this material, the extraction of natural resources and infrastructures. So sand is the third most consumed natural resource after water and air. And the construction industry is actually the biggest sand consumer all over the world. So the sand industry has an impact on various ecosystems and different communities. Intensive extraction of sand causes the collapse of ecosystems, affect the biological, geological, and social realms as well. For example, in Cambodia and Malaysia, the backfilling of Singapore, which is expanding its territory, has already caused the disappearance of over 2,000 islands. While Canada has more than 700 sand pits and quarries, and that the retreat of glaciers 15,000 years ago left significant amounts of sediments, these issues still seem very far removed from our daily preoccupations. And I became interested in this raw material in North America, primarily in the US and in Canada. So dust silica became a small application that cataloged the coordinates of sand pits and quarries in governmental records and corporate databases. So the application then scans or tours Google Earth to find these sites, photograph them, catalog them, and stitch them. And I'm briefly looping back to dust agitator before moving on with our current research projects. So Dust Agitator is a project that looks at glass dust, recycled glass dust, and its impact on health and well-being. A large volume of fine glass particles are produced in Quebec, and the current procedures and technology in place don't really know how to handle this dust, and it mostly ends up in landfill. So the piece Dust Agitator is engaged in processes of accumulation, filtering, swirling, erosion, and wear, and the different installations and the different versions of the installation produce clouds, sediments, and particles, sound, and light modulation. So these three past projects brought me to my current research and what I really want to talk about today, the Kirk and critical practices in materials and materiality. But before discussing this, I would like to situate the environment of the chair within the university so you understand better what we do and where we do it. Okay. So basically the chair in critical practices in materials and materiality looks at cultural, social, environmental, and technological issues linking material and cultural production. Research creation intersects with practices in materials engineering and also environmental sciences that are also mobilized with social environmental problematics. And the goal is to develop practical, theoretical, methodological, and aesthetic knowledge and experiences about our engagement with resilient materials or materials that could potentially be resilient for environment and communities. So the chair is designed as a space for creation, a space for innovation, a space for dialogue, also the circulation of ideas and action about the multiple ecological implications linked to our material world. And we have a few members of the chair right now with us. We have Jacqueline, we have Brice, we have Philippe Vandal, who work with me. We also have John, who created the fantastic branding of the chair. Yeah. So the research is conducted partly at the Milieu Speculative Life Biolab. The Biolab is a hybrid research creation lab for the development and facilitation of conceptual and material-based exploration around the changing status of life on the planet and also the technosphere. So the space is certified with the biosafety level 1 certification, and the lab works with living and electronic media. We work with both dry and wet processes. Okay. So the chair equally works across the topological media lab situated on the 7th floor of the EV building and the Cities Institute. So the topological media lab looks at how people build, inhabit, use, sensate, or activate space and matter. And the lab is a kind of lab atelier, and projects conducted in the lab inform research in the areas of the built environment, material, computational design within responsive environments. So the current research of the Kirk looks at questions of residue, but from a broader social, biological, and technical perspective. I won't show all projects, but I will focus on 3 or 4, all under various stages of development and ongoing until 2025 and 2026. Okay. So first, the air filtration project looks at air particles as residues from the built environment and how they form with air a collective biological, geological, anthropogenic assemblage that unfolds across different timelines and scales. So this invisible material gathers a range of socio-political, health, and environmental issues. So how do we make the invisible tangible? The project looks at how air filtering and soft dynamic membranes can create new experiences with something that is by definition unwanted. So it's operating in the trajectory of dust agitator, I would say. So beyond this abstractive process, filtration is envisioned as an interfacing strategy, rather, between materials, between disciplines, and with communities. It involves fieldwork with scientists, the development of filtering membranes and scaffolds as artistic interventions, skins, porous structures leading to responsive environments, and citizen engagement workshops. So what's in the air? During the pandemic, the air quality improved in Montreal. However, Health Canada estimates that air pollution contributes to at least 15,000 premature deaths per year in Canada, and this includes approximately 4,000 in Quebec. So what do we find in urban air in general? We find fine particles, PMs, that can be composed of hundreds of different chemicals. Some are emitted directly from construction sites, unpaved roads, fields, smokestacks, fires. Basically, most particles are formed in the atmosphere as a result of chemical reactions. We find ozone, ground-level ozone that we breathe is formed by the mingling of VOCs, volatile organic compounds, and nitrogen oxides. We find nitrogen dioxide produced by burning fuel, and also sulfur dioxide, fossil fuels again, power plants, other industrial facilities. So to explore issues of air quality, the team investigated a specific Montreal infrastructure, the Metropolitan Highway, a short portion of the Trans-Canadian Highway that stretches east-west across the island of Montreal. And we look at how the distribution of atmospheric pollution along the path of this highway filters in and out social-environmental problematics. So from a historical perspective, this is a very interesting terrain and a very interesting trajectory for addressing the social environmental aspects of atmospheric pollution. In the 60s, Montreal witnessed the construction of major infrastructure works such as the Ville-Marie Expressway, the Expo 67 site as well, and all this facilitated the rise of car culture, individual transportation. And we had neighborhoods such as Saint-Michel located next to the construction site of the Metropolitan Highway, who also housed the Miron Quarry and supplied these major projects with raw materials such as sand, crushed stones, asphalt, cement, concrete blocks. So for local residents who were already, I would say, enduring the tremors of blasting and dust clouds from the quarry, the construction of the highway increased the already disturbing level of noise and dust and atmospheric pollution. And also, the construction of this highway encouraged the installation of large industries along its path and disrupted the social fabric of the area by cutting certain neighborhoods into halves. Okay. Although the Miron quarry was transformed into a landfill and is now the site of the Parc Frédéric Bach, air in Saint-Michel and Montreal East neighborhoods highlights interesting socioeconomic disparities in a precarious ground as the highway crosses lower income areas, home to diverse cultural groups and immigrant populations. Atmospheric toxicity, something felt although invisible, thus reveals social-political and technological contours of harmful practices. For example, Montreal East with its oil refineries such as Suncor, which Philippe addressed earlier, and the Pointe-aux-Trembles sector where industrial activity increases the prevalence of pulmonary diseases. So the different landscapes along this highway reveal, interestingly, different forms of precarity and pressing question of social environmental justice linked to the accessibility to a healthy environment. So for this research, which operates a form of critical vigilance of air, we also conduct field work in various air quality monitoring stations, which are located in urban, peri-urban, and industrial areas. For this, we work mainly with the Ville de Montréal, Service de l'Environnement, and more recently with Air Paris in Paris. And the goal is to understand how environmental data is captured, processed, modeled. And while these infrastructure are kind of opaque black boxes that are not open to the public, their technologies are rather unknown, and public indications about air quality are most often transmitted under the form of red, yellow, or green alerts. As the project looks at the connection between data about air and the materiality of air, those scientific collaborations are for us a way to learn from these scientific methods, these scientific instruments, and to draw inspiration to create public mediation workshops and an exhibition to come in 2023 that I will discuss later. Here you see La Station Léal in Paris, in the center of Paris, and different PM10 and PM2.5, I think, capture heads. Here's the inside of the station, which connects with the capture heads outside. And here are other more monitoring equipment directly related to the question of filtration. On the left, filters, which accumulate larger air particles coming from the outside. And on the right, a tape recorder made of quartz paper onto which the air sucked from the outside creates patterns ranging from light gray to black, depending on the current pollution level. So how to follow air and see what it reveals, foreclose, enable in the city? How couldn't we both study the highway and how does the specific work in air monitoring stations inspire different objects? Bordering areas of the metropolitan highway show contested terrain where nature, industrial activity, and human collectivities co-evolve. So the team developed the NOBAD Air Kit, a connected portable apparatus powered by solar energy. So the kit measures fine particles levels, PM, VOCs, volatile organic compounds, CO2 levels, and temperatures. So the kit has been experimented in different at-risk areas in Montreal, and this information, the data about air, is transmitted on a database, and this field studies also parallels with the different site-specific work we're doing in the stations. So beyond capturing data, which is not really the point, the kit develops new forms of attunements with air and with sites, and methods of aesthetic and critical engagement between urban atmospheres, the city, and the body. Why I'm saying that it's not really the point to capture data? Well, it is in a way, because you'll see in this installation it informs all sorts of behaviors. However, the point is not to have this kind of precise level of data, because we know that with these kind of low-tech DIY sensors, the level of discrepancies is higher than, say, with the air monitoring station of the city. So the goal is not accuracy, but rather attunement and engagement. So here, next to the Suncor refineries in Montreal East End, okay? And going back to a more material practice, how all this field work brings us to develop different techniques and soft materials for tracking, filtering, and transforming atmospheric processes, and see how they produce new forms of aesthetic engagement. For instance, we're developing custom methods for creating 3D air filters out of abaca fibers, which is a derivative of banana leaves. We use foam, freeze drying, vacuum forming as expansion techniques. And we're at the stage of exploring what form and behavior can this material take, and how these soft membranes will translate in an installation in 2023-2024. So on the screen, you can see the result of capturing air under the highway in Montreal after an hour. We also experiment other expansion processes and ask how to grow filters, how to create passage or interstices where air can leave traces over time. So to look at these questions, we developed three-dimensional scaffolds, approximately 6 inches and printed in different 3D materials, such as resin or PLA. And these scaffolds are then dipped in some abaca mixture, form mixture, and left to dry. And this process allowed the fibers to envelop the scaffold and become tangled amongst themselves, leaving a kind of web of fiber and casting the mesh structure beneath. What's interesting is abaca's fiber structure becomes self-supporting when processed as foam and left to dry. So this experimentation led to an installation prototype at Père de Signal this summer with the whole team who worked on the project. Present in the room we have Jacqueline, we have we have Brice, and we have Phil. I can't see the others, but it's really a teamwork. Something that I value with the chair is also horizontal collaboration, where everyone is a co-author of the artworks we create. So everyone worked extremely hard on that first prototype. Another outcome of this research on air was an exhibition at the Planetarium of Montreal in the spring, Inertia, Speculative Fossils. So the premise was the following. In 1977, the two Voyager probes were launched into space to study the planets in our solar system. So symbolically, each one carried a gold-plated copper disc bearing a message intended to represent humanity. It contained images, music, and drawings meant for hypothetical intelligent extraterrestrial life forms. And Inertia, our project, applied this approach on Earth using artifacts created to reflect today's environmental challenges. So the work centered around a bioplastic disc, which was meant to carry data of humanity. And that displayed a binary representation of daytime air quality near petrochemical factories in the east of Montreal. So I'll stop it here. So the Nomad Air Kit that you've seen a few slides ago captures data, and this becomes the raw material to develop scores for pieces of music designed by Guillaume Pascal, a collaborator, in a sequence of 4 pieces. So the whole idea is to combine both the air quality data to make music, but also to calculate the distance of the Voyager probes from Earth every day, because they're still there in space, and they're further and further away every day. So basically those 2 factors influence the music. The concept is also to think about how those disappearing probes and the Voyager probes can be a metaphor for the living conditions of the planet, and also how everything is becoming increasingly precarious. Okay. Speaking of bioplastics, this brings me to discuss another project, the Membranes in Action project. So Membranes in Action experiments with a flexible and reactive object inspired by living systems. The research looks at how the concept of membrane can shape new aesthetic relationships, sensory and critical, between the built environment, ecological milieus, technologies, humans, and environment. So what is a membrane? It's a flexible envelope at the interface of materials, liquid or gases, and through their ability to transform over time, we can think about leaves of plants, about cells. These surfaces show that humans and the ecosystem they inhabit always co-constitute. So the project Membranes in Action explore the adaptive processes of membranes from a historical perspective in science and art, in practice, and within the emerging field of responsive architecture. We did many, I would say, public activities, among them the recent material workshop that was hosted by Hexagram and Electra. And I will show you the first outcome of the project, which was presented at the Centre Pompidou a year or so ago in 2021. So before putting sound, I will just explain briefly how fossilization is a large bioplastic membrane and it floats above the ground like a film roll. It explores the question of the ecological imprint of images, and its color is made from food waste, onions, and it's brought to life by slow form-taking processes. We imprinted obsolete electronic displays in the bioplastic. Just like a fossil, the components that are imprinted in matter are gradually disappearing. The membrane is attached to sensors that capture the residual energies of the building, movement, heat waste, vibration, and so on, to create electric signals that influence the lighting of the piece. So fossilization led to a recent publication, an open source research creation folio available for download on Riverside Architectural Press. So the publication was co-written by the whole research team and is organized around 7 key thematics that pertain to the making of that piece. The ecology of images, fossils, fossilization ingredients, our bioplastic recipe is there, open source, bioplastics, systems architecture for energy and light, nurturing slow expectation that speaks about slow methods, and membranes as relay that speak about the historical and filiation of that piece. Together, these forces or thematics render visible the resonances and contrast between the conceptual, material, technological, and methodological dimension of the piece. The emphasis is on slow and low-tech methods, and the folio looks at how fossilization might contribute to next-generation living architecture. Another project we conduct with materials engineering at McGill is the co-creation of responsive graphene oxide structure. Graphene oxide, or GO, is a layered carbon-based nanomaterial that is derived from the oxidation and exfoliation of graphite, which is also synthesized from organic waste. And GO find a wide wide range of applications in electronic and high-tech material composites. It can self-assemble in different 2D and 3D scaffolds and structure, such as membranes. And in this project, we address questions both in material science, in engineering, and in design. Up to which point can materials become alive and change themselves based on external stimulation, such as pH, ion concentration, light, and so on. And we also ask, can the interaction between materials and the environment help improve our own environment through responsive sensors, skins, objects, and filters? The way we work, we have design, arts, and engineering students and postdocs and PhDs and masters as well, who collaborate and work together both in the Milieu Institute and at McGill's Biointerface Lab. And the goal is to fabricate geo-based responsive membranes from the nano to the macro and look at how we could speculate applications for the built environment. Another ongoing project of the Kirk is Excitable MRE materials. It's a pilot study that is co-led with mechanical and aerospace engineering at Concordia, and the project just started a year ago. We started from the premise that research in new materials is often tied to certain industries and their specific needs, and we wanted to develop at once new domains of inquiry, integrative sustainable working methods, and new critical aesthetics with what we call MREs. MREs, or magneto-rheological elastomers, are multifunctional materials which properties such as stiffness or damping can be changed through an external magnetic field. These unique features can be utilized in current areas ranging from dynamic vibration control in aircrafts and spacecrafts, smart actuators, sensors, and so on. However, research in MRE materials did not look much at the sustainability question first, because these are usually polymer-based materials, and this question of how we can excite matter and create processes of excitability has not been investigated both simultaneously by artists, designers, and engineers toward interactive installations and design objects. So excitability is defined by Natasha Myers as affectivity of living matter, both in its responsiveness and indeterminacy. So we borrow this concept from philosophy and biology, and we look at how to examine the behavioral, experimental, and experiential potential of these magnetic materials. And I'll end with this project, which is called Outer Space and the City, Cohabitation Strategies with Interplanetary Infrastructures, conducted with my colleague Marie-Pierre Boucher at University of Toronto. So we look at telecommunication infrastructures and how we can think about ways of engaging with them in a more diverse, sustainable, and just way. So today's most important global telecommunication infrastructures are in the GEO. One satellite in the GEO can see 42% of Earth, while 3 satellites can cover the whole globe. And one problem with our outer space infrastructures is that they facilitate life on Earth, life on the city, but they're out of sight and they're out of reach. So basically it creates physical, technical, and economic limitation imposed by their accessibility. And it also creates, I would say, obstacle to inform civic engagement and creative adaptations of these technology. So in response to this, this problem of structural inequality, the project looks at what are the material forms that can be developed with telecommunication infrastructures in the city. Can we create new participatory design approaches to rethink those infrastructure? And is it possible at all to think about sustainable interplanetary infrastructures? So the project works at the intersection of communication and media studies, design and urbanism, space, science, and technology, to look at different strategies of cohabitation that give rise to, I would say, new forms of informed participation and engagement and sustainable connection with telecommunication. So in year a place of a conclusion, I will end my presentation by this beautiful and poetic reflection on how we inhabit Earth and space, proposed by Guillaume Pascal, who is working both in the air filtration project and the outer space and the city project. So Guillaume is a student researcher at UQAM, affiliated with the Kirk.
Invented the word la ville radieuse. La ville radieuse, la ville radieuse. I have invented the word la ville radieuse. La ville radieuse. Radieuse.
Thank you. I'd be happy to take question if any.
Anyone have any questions? Hey, just into the mic.
Thank you, Alice, for this presentation. So I wonder because what do you think about the connection between the intangible object, because you're researching on air, and when you're researching it and when you're presenting it through your creative practice, you turn it, or you mediate, you use some tangible object like the air filter you made and also the 3D scaffold. So how do you think about the process of this mediation transformation between the tangible and intangible materiality?
What do I think? Well, there is this question among the group about how to make something tangible, something invisible, tangible. And air is full of materials. It's just that it's so expanded that we don't see it. Well, sometimes we see smog, but it's interesting that although we think we all breathe the same air, we don't. There is like global air, regional air, local air, and so on that are all impacted by different climate and anthropogenic, I would say, phenomena and activities. And with that question of how do we make the tangible, the invisible tangible, I think it operates among the group at many levels. At the political level, at the technological level, at the material level. So there is this kind of desire to un-black box things, because when you think about, say, air monitoring stations, you don't have access to it. No one knows that, say in Pointe-aux-Trembles in a park, you have a little cabane, and then in that cabane you have fancy equipment that guides you and that informs how atmospheres are measured. So there is this desire of un-black boxing, I would say, but also this desire of creating new critical imaginaries. And it's not about saying, okay, I'm going to translate the information. To go back to your question of translation and mediation, and I don't think the methodological axis of this research project is to say, okay, I'm going to translate from A to B to raise awareness. I think research creation on that matter has the potential of creating new critical imaginaries through tangible object outcomes. So that's how I see it. You want to say?
Oh, I was just going to say thank you so much for presenting today.
Well, thanks to you, and thanks to Ford Space, and thanks to the whole critical materiality group, and thanks to everyone. Yeah.